We're now live on YouTube with the December 7th edition of the Node.js release working group. Bethany, I'll let you take it from here.
Cool, thanks, Miles. So hi everyone, we'll be working from the release issue in, I think it's release issue 500, yep. And we'll work through the agenda and we'll take minutes in the Google Doc. The first item on the release agenda is the clarify to the LTS bit flip process. So we open that. So this has a few rules. I guess the answer would be maybe Michael and Ruben, if you could take a look and see if you've got any additional thoughts before we merge this in. I think this is just stating that the transition from current to LTS will always be a minor release. Any further comments on this one? No?
I'm fine with that.
Cool.
Yeah, me too.
And the next one is the release schedule. So thanks, Michael, for putting this one together. I think we're sticking with the 2 weeks. Oh no, this is 12. 12's LTS, once per month. So I guess myself and any of members of the LTS group need to volunteer for some of these. I can probably put my name down for the December one, but so, I don't.
I think we need to already change the schedule, and something that I don't see on the schedule that we've had in the LTS schedules before is the date for the RC, because we do not, like, we've generally been doing the RC 2 weeks and then the main release, and we don't even have enough time right now, even if we cut the 12.x release today, the RC today, to have 2 weeks of RC. So I think we should potentially augment these dates to allow for an RC for 12.13.1, but also to just document what the RC dates would be.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, I realized I forgot about that. Is there an official documentation that says we need to publish an RC 2 weeks before the release, or it's just what's always been done?
That, I guess, has just been more the way that we've done things. In theory, we don't need to do that, but we've generally done a 2-week RC for the Semver patch releases and a 3-week RC for the Semver minors. We could choose to document that or not, but I don't know how things went with 10, but I'm pretty sure we've been fairly consistent about that, at least on 8 and 6 and 4.
And the goal is to not add commits to the branch after the RC has been published, unless there are issues.
Yeah, exactly. So other than you know, things that are broken, or issues that have been raised, or major bugs that are reported, we do not really change the RC after the RC has been cut. So what this generally turns into from like a workflow perspective is kind of like 2 weeks of backporting, then the cut, then 2 weeks of fixing anything that's broken, and then it going out.
One comment.
Okay, so the day we publish the first RC is when the pull request is open for the release proposal.
Mm-hmm.
Beth, what were you about to say?
One of the issues we just had recently is for the 10.17 Semver minor, because we've kind of swapped to not landing everything in 10 because the backlog of commits is so high. It actually did take me like opening the PR to get people to start pinging saying, hey, this should go in, hey, this should go in. So we kind of didn't follow that for 10. We added most of the commits after the original RC had been opened.
Mm-hmm.
I still like having the RC period, but it did seem to, for 10, if we swap to please tell us what you want in this release, we are going to end up making more changes.
Just as a question, do we land PRs on those backport release lines that are younger than 2 weeks, and do we only backport things that have landed before? That question would apply because as far as I remember, we have like the 2 weeks rule that each commit should be on the release line for at least 2 weeks. On the current release line, sorry.
Yeah, so it's whether the 2 weeks is before the RC date or before the actual release date, I guess.
I have generally done it that it's 2 weeks before you land it, not 2 weeks before the RC date. But I think that, you know, in general, these things are very much meant to be at the the releaser and the backporting team is meant to have a bit of insight into this. And if there's something that's important to land, you know, we always can look at things on a case-by-case basis and be pragmatic about it.
Okay, so for example, for the next release, so let's say we do an RC next week to release 2 weeks later.
Mm-hmm.
Can we take as a base branch 13.1 and just skip the Semver minor commits from it? So we know that in 3 weeks, all the commits in 13.1 will have been at least 2 weeks in a release.
Oh, so that's what I generally do when I'm building the LTS branch is I'll run branch diff on the 13.x branch.
On the latest.
Yeah,
The
so
most recent 13, yeah, 13.x. So it's the most recent 13.
Yeah, exactly. So if I go and grab, just need to find a gist and
then you exclude labels, Semver minor, and baking for LTS and stuff.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
That.
So yeah, so here's an example of like I'll just drop it in the chat, and I'm sure Beth has more recent examples. But this was like the branch diff command that would be used when auditing for 10. So it's branch diff 10.x staging against upstream 11.x.
Okay, cool. So I guess I will try to prepare the branch for the next 12.x.
Yeah.
And we'll see if that goes well.
Yeah.
So I propose to postpone the release by 1 week, but not change the rest of the schedule.
Okay.
Because I think it's I mean it's not there's no real reason for it, but I just try to take the last Tuesday of the month as the release date.
That makes sense. Yeah, we had usually done the first Tuesday, but I think what's more important is less like picking like using a day that we've done in the past, but being like fairly consistent about where in the month it's landing is good to have. Do we want to add maybe one more column that just says the RC date?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay.
Great.
Won't do it in a meeting, but cool. Sure. Okay. So I can probably take the December release for 12. So if that covers us up to the end of the year for 12. Actually, I'll put my name by that. Which one is it? This one. Cool.
Yeah, and then maybe we can use a meeting in December to come up with, you know, the Q1 releasers for the next 3 releases.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There will be a session at the Collaborator Summit. I don't know if we can all attend that, but maybe we could use some of that time and start building up an agenda for our time there.
That works good for me.
Okay.
If Michael and Ruben, are you going to be at Interactive?
I won't.
Okay, then maybe we can try to find a time that works for you and you can dial in.
Okay. Yeah, that would be cool.
Okay. Sure. Back on the agenda. Next item is the 13 releases.
So it looks like we've got people volunteered until January. So we're probably good on this until December.
Awesome. Cool.
I'm not sure, but I don't hear anything at the moment. Does anyone say something?
Do you hear
Hello?
me?
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah.
I am talking right now. Can you hear me?
Can you hear me, Ruben?
Yeah, now I hear you. I guess my network was just gone for a few seconds.
Okay. The last thing we mentioned was just that we think we're covered for 13.x up until January in terms of releases. So we're good for 13.
Mm-hmm.
Next item on the agenda is running benchmarks during release.
Yeah. So we, for example, with the primordials, ran into some significant performance drops between the releases due to a very, it seems like a very minor change in a way, where things should not break, but streams got a performance hit. And it would be really cool if we'd find a way to run our micro benchmarks maybe and on one version, save the results of that, and run on the next version on the very same machine, the benchmarks again under hopefully very similar conditions, so that we would be able to compare the results of the former benchmarks with the current one, or we would just run the benchmark twice, which would be a simpler way and probably easier to synchronize, that we run before release the former version, then run the release proposal and benchmarks, and compare if they have a big difference and if there are any big drops in there or not.
I think we have a CI job that already does that, the comparison, and tells you how from the percentage of drop or win.
Oh, okay.
But the main issue here would be to decide which benchmarks we run, because if we run all of them, it takes really a lot of time. I don't know how long you need to run all the benchmarks, but it's very long.
Yeah, at the moment our micro benchmarks are partially taking very long. I tried to already reduce a couple of those so that they would finish in a relatively fine time, but it really depends. And sometimes we just land the new micro benchmarks that takes hours or days even, even though it should not. And like maybe we could even introduce like a recommendation and update our benchmarks in case an individual benchmarks takes longer than, I don't know, let's say, yeah, well, depends on like the individual rule should not take very long to benchmark, only a few seconds per run, and then 30 runs twice. So maybe like 3 seconds multiplied by 60, so 3 minutes. What do you think about that?
So I think it's a good idea to run benchmarks before the release. If we do that, we need a somehow a way to say if the difference is okay or not, or if we have to block the release because there's the difference is too big. So
Yeah.
Is that on a case-by-case basis, or do we put some rules?
I would say it's a case-by-case situation, because of course there might be sometimes things that we cannot influence, and it depends on how big maybe the performance issue is and on what part of the application. Like if it's something very performance sensitive and like streams, or if it's, I don't know, console log.
So one thing that I think is worth kind of throwing out there, to be clear to start, I think this is a great idea and we should figure out how to implement it. But in the case of primordials, as far as I know, the micro benchmark suite did not even show any differences. It was the performance degradation that happened was under extreme CPU load, and was identified out of band of our benchmarks. So I mentioned that only to say that, like, while this would be good to implement, it's not guaranteeing us to actually fix these things or check it. I think that one thing that we definitely could do, which might be helpful, would be like a nightly job with the benchmarks that are going against the staging branches potentially, to flag on things early. But yeah, I think a combination of like how to make this fast, and I say that in quotes because we also do carrying the gold mine, which is also, you know, a slow job. But secondly, the important thing would be ensuring that all the releasers like actually know how to read the results of these benchmark suites. Will be one of the more important bits to figure out.
I think that's a good point, especially with the staging staging releases, or I'm not sure how we set it up there. So ideally, we would even be notified earlier about these problems, and maybe not as a releaser, but maybe as an issue that would be opened. And of course, the benchmark suite has to have a benchmark that actually also triggers that specific part. So it won't ever be guaranteed to detect a couple of things, but it's at least like one part that we can do to improve things like that, and to detect them potentially earlier.
So would we mainly be benchmarking between like 12.x and 12.x staging just to check that we're not degrading the performance between releases in the same release line, rather than comparing to like master or 10 or a different release line?
Yeah, we could run the nightly against the former release, right?
Mm.
It's starting to sound like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that we're now starting to talk about doing something that may require like getting build involved or someone who could help automate this.
That's always the ideal case, but of course that's not, yeah, in the end that would be ideal.
What I mean is more like, are we talking about things that we have the time and expertise to implement?
In the beginning, we could do it manually. As I said, if we have the job to just start the Jenkins job, if it exists. And do you know how this is named, Michael?
No, I'm sure Brian White does because he uses it a lot. But I don't remember the name. But I think the first step would be to come up with a configuration for this job that doesn't take hours to run.
Yeah.
Or not too many hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's what we could do amongst us between now and next meeting, is try playing with that job once we found it in Jenkins, and see if there's a way we can kind of do a delta between two releases and how long it takes roughly. Because what would be nice is if we could even just say, as part of the node test release candidate job, it kicked off some configuration between two releases, like the RC release and the latest of that release line.
Yeah, there is just one with the comparison. That should be fine. Yeah. all good.
Okay.
I think we can do that at least in the beginning as a manual start by starting the individual job during the release. That would already help seeing some things sometimes.
Yeah, we can try that. Okay, I'll add that into the minutes. On the issue. Okay. The next one is release survey. I don't think we've spoken about this for a while. Let's scroll down to the bottom.
Yeah, so there were major concerns mentioned by Miles, and I personally would not want to follow the path of the survey anymore due to those concerns. So, I mean, I personally still think it's a good idea, but I would not progress on it. So I'm not sure if someone else would want to step up and do that, or thinks it's a good idea or not.
I guess we have done this. We've done proposal 2. We did change that for 12. Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess there will always be a discussion at some point in our meetings about how we can optimize things and make managing, particularly the LTS releases, easier. Do you feel we should leave this open for anyone to take a look at, just as information for us to work from?
I'm neutral to that. I think maybe others can decide on that.
I think we can leave it open because there are interesting things in the first post that we updated in a previous meeting. But maybe we can remove the release agenda label for now.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And the final item on the agenda is defining a word for all current releases. I think this is actually waiting on Michael. Michael was going to PR because I think we agreed on the terminology in here.
Michael, me or Michael Dawson?
Sorry, Michael Dawson, sorry. So when we see Michael's PR, we can all review and see if we can agree on consistent terminology. I know it's on his to-do list. And
okay,
that's everything on the agenda. Is there anything else anyone wants to mention? And one thing in particular is we have about a month to go before the Collaborator Summit. Is there anything people feel should be raised during the release session? I'm not sure if I opened an issue for it yet. No. So Node.js. I'll just put that as working title. Is there anything in particular you can think we should make sure we discuss during that time? No. One thing I would be interested in is if we can use the session as maybe some onboarding or talking about how we can onboard more releases, because I know there's only a handful of us at the moment doing releases and it's a lot of work. So that's just one thing. Automation, I know we talk about that at most of the release working group meetings. We can leave this open and I'll add the release agenda. And anyone thinks of something we should talk about in that session, just let us know and add to the issue. Is there anything else anyone wants to mention today?
Nope.
No? Okay. So I'll leave it there, and thanks for joining everyone, and speak to you all soon.
Great. Thanks for all the hard work, everyone.
Yeah, thanks. Have a good day. Bye.